will you shut the door for me when you go take it over there? All right, so we're starting section 8.2, exponent rules. So we've already discussed exponents and what exponents mean. And hopefully these sections, this chapter here, seems really familiar because this was chapter 7 in 8th grade. So this would have been one of the chapters or one of the sections you completed around this time in 8th grade. Okay. So exponent rule says I can multiply and divide monomials. So you're going to be multiplying and dividing expressions that have exponents. So my first question to you, you do not have to write this down. This is just a thinking question. Don't call out the answer. I'll call on someone to give us the answer. What does this mean? X squared. What does x squared mean? You don't have to write anything down. Just think about it. Don't call out anything. I'll ask. Chase, what does x squared mean? Yeah, it means x times x. So x squared is the same thing as x times x. Okay? What about x to the 5th? What does that mean? Brooklyn?
X times x times x times x times x.
Yeah, x to the 5th means x times x times x times x times x. Well, math people are really lazy and they hate writing because you have to write so much anyway that instead of them writing x times x times x times x times x, they just write x to the 5th power and then we just know it to mean that. Okay, so they're going to use any type of abbreviations they can. All right, so this first problem on your paper says multiply x to the 5th times x to the 3rd. So we're going to write that out. So for x to the 5th, you said that was pretty much 5 x's being multiplied by themselves. X times x times x times x times x. So that's x to the 5th. And then times x to the 3rd would be x times x times x. Okay.
Equals.
So x to the 5th was x times 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 x. Now that I have all of this written out, I could easily just write that as what? Gavin?
5 times 3.
No,
Not necessarily.
3x.
Brianna, how would I rewrite this? X times 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 x. We just took a test over it.
1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1.
Not quite. Caleb?
What do I have? 1?
Okay, we just took a quiz over it. I'm wanting to rewrite this expression. I hate writing all of these x's. And so instead of me writing x times 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 x, how could I rewrite that?
X with the power of 5 and then also an x with the power of 3.
But I only want to write one thing. Ethan?
Oh.
How would you write it? If I don't want to write as much, I don't want to write x times 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 x. What could I write instead?
5x times.
Not quite.
Let's do
Amber?
X to the power of 8.
X to the power of 8.
That just made me mad.
Yeah, remember,
You said that?
if you have 2 times 2 times 2, that's 2 to the 3rd power. If you have x times x times x, that's x to the 3rd. If you have x times 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 x, that's x to the 8th. Again, math people are lazy. They're going to write the smallest thing that they can so they don't have to write as much. So that's x to the 8th. So what that tells us is x to the 5th times x to the 3rd equals x to the 8th. My next question. Could there have been a more simple way for me to do that instead of me having to write out all of those x's? Parker?
X with the power of 5 plus 3.
So you're saying I could have just done 5 plus 3? and I wouldn't have had to go through all that work.
Technically.
Perfect.
It's not a person down.
That's right, you go for week, didn't you?
Teachers, all of our cow catchers should be headed back to class at this time,
Oh,
so
would?
make sure you have everybody, thank
The
you.
cows got out.
Alright, so here's your rule. Okay, so that was the problem on your paper.
How do cows get out?
Just.
Alright, so multiplication rule says, you need to be paying attention. When you multiply variables with the same base, so that means it has to have the same base, like it has to be x to something times x to something, or 2 to the power of 3 times 2 to the power of 7. The bases have to be the same. You add the exponent, so notes. You need to be copying this in. Notice there's a fill in the blank, you need to fill in the part that's missing. When you multiply variables with the same base, you add the exponents.
That AM, do we need to put on example 1?
We're about to talk about it. Right now, you just need to fill in the blank. When you multiply variables with the same base, you add the exponents. And then I also have the rule written out in algebra terms. So right there underneath where you wrote add, you're going to write the actual rule in algebra terms. A to the m power times a to the n power. You just do a to the m plus n power. That's this rule. This is the rule in words. This is the rule in algebra. So the rule in words is already written for you. You just got to fill in the blank. Now you need to write the rule in algebra terms, in algebra language.
So this is a free algebra.
No, it's pretty much.
You need to finish writing your rule out. You need to write your rule right here. Your rule goes here, right underneath your rule. You need to write your rule out right here.
You're confusing me.
This is a rule.
A-N.
The multiplication rule, you need to write out that rule right there.
This?
What I have written on the board,
Yeah, it's not example 1. It's the algebra.
it's a rule.
Man, if she wrote it down, just print it down.
This is a rule. It needs to go up here. It's not an example, it's a rule.
That's what those look like.
Alright, you need to write the rule
Yeah, I
down.
know, I have to.
This is a rule. It's not an example, it's a rule. So it needs to go underneath the rule. Alright, so this is a rule. So now let's do an actual example. Example 1. We're going to do a to the 4th power times a to the 7th. So you need to write the example down first. I left it off of there so that way we wouldn't have people working ahead not paying attention. So for number 1, you need to write down a to the 4th times a to the 7th. First thing you need to check for is if they have the same base. Do they have the same base?
Yeah.
Yes. So then, since I'm multiplying, it tells me I can just add the exponents. So all you got to do, you keep the same base. Keep the base the same. So it equals a, and then you add the exponents. So you do 4 plus 7. Alex, what's 4 plus 7? So my answer would be a to the 11th power.
So we don't have to show work, we just gotta do that.
That's good.
Well, I showed my works.
All right. Remember, if you have a question, raise your hand. And remember, we designate times for questions.
Just write
Now,
one.
what questions do you have on it?
So does that, like, A, does that mean 1?
No, that just means for any number. For instance, if a was 2, 2 to the 4th power times 2 to the 7th power is the same as 2 to the 11th. And type it in your calculator. Type in your calculator, 2 to the 4th power times 2 to the 7th power,
Correct.
and hit enter.
2048.
Now type in your calculator 2 to the 11th power.
2048.
I got 2047.
So, now, and this works with any number. You could plug in 6, and 6 to the 4th times 6 to the 7th will equal 6 to the 11th. You could even type in a negative. Negative 2 to the 4th times negative 2 to the 7th will equal negative 2 to the 11th power. This just means that A just means it works for any number. You can plug in any number you want to.
So,
Alright, let's go to the next example. Number 2. Let me make sure that's number 2. Because for some reason I have a feeling that it skipped one.
that's,
Nope, that's number 2. Alright, here's number 2. X times x to the 4th times y to the 3rd times y to the 4th times z. So write that down for your
Three
example.
different letters.
Now, I have a reminder here for you that x, when you see x by itself, that means x to the first power. So if you ever see a variable that does not have an exponent, I would put a 1 there to remind you that it has an exponent of 1. Okay, so what I would do here is, with this x, I would put a 1, and with this z, I would put a 1. Just to remind me. Now, whenever you add exponents, they have to have the same base. So you couldn't do 1 plus 4 plus 3 plus 4 plus 1 because they're not the same base. So you're going to have to group bases together. So first do it, and you want to do it in alphabetical order. So first you would group together the x's. So you would do x to the first times x to the 4th, which is what?
X5, 5x.
X to the 5th power
you said straight.
times
5x, x5.
y to the 3rd times y to the 4th. What's y to the 3rd times y to the 4th?
Y7.
Y to the 7th. So x to the 5th times y to the 7th. Is there anything for me to do to the
Z
z?
to the 1. Z to the 1.
Yeah. But we don't put a 1. We just leave it as z.
Why? But you said
I said that so.
That's where you're adding them up, you put a 1.
Yeah.
You're leaving them alone and down at 1, you don't put
And you don't have to put the multiplication symbol there. Are we writing this down? We must be writing this down. You do not have to put the multiplication symbol in between them. We automatically know them to be multiplying. The only time you want to put a multiplication symbol is if you have like x and x, like x times x, because you want to know what you're doing with them. But really, you don't even have to have the multiplication symbol in. Once you get down to it, you pretty much forget about the multiplication symbol.
Are you for real? Am I gonna have to have to get ADOC next year?
All right, let's go on.
man, you still stuck on that. Remember. Do we need to write that?
Here's our next one, number 3. Write this one down. X times x to the 3rd times x to the 8th. Number 3. X times x to the 3rd times x to the 8th. All right, Gavin, tell me, what would you do first?
You would, find that exponent or not exponent, so. Base, whatever.
The base, okay, are all the bases the same?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so tell me what to do.
Well, since they're the same, you could add 3 plus 8.
Okay, what's 3 plus 8?
3 plus 8 is 11.
Okay, all right. Ian, do you agree with that answer?
No,
Parker, why do you disagree?
because you put out the X right there.
What's this exponent?
1.
A 1. So not only do you have to add 3 plus 8, you also have to add a 1. So instead of x to the 11th, it should be x to the 12. But very good. So everything was done correctly. We just forgot the 1. That's why anytime I see a variable by itself, I go ahead and put a 1 there because I know from personal experience that I may forget. All right, now that we've done a couple examples, what questions do you have for me about the product rule?
So, why would you multiply 3 and 8 because of the multiplication?
Because I showed you y in the beginning, because x to the 5th times x to the 3rd, that's why I worked it out the long way, to show you why you add and don't multiply. Ian, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, about that. Yeah, can we do the rest by ourselves?
No, we can't even.
Let's do number 4.
Boy. Girl. Who? Female. Girl.
Here's number 4. I'll give you a second to write this one down.
And
X times x to the 3rd y times x to the 8th, y to the 3rd.
That's a lot of numbers.
Now, that is a lot of writing. You circle here. Hey, at least it isn't like as bad as Mr. Williams.
Alright,
All you do is write notes.
you need to be writing the problem down. Okay, so you need to look at the variables individually and go in alphabetical order, okay? So Alexis, what variable would I look at first? Look at X first. All right, Alexis, go through and count up all the X's and tell me how many you get total for the X's.
17.
Huh?
What? Listen, if you go one,
What
oh,
are
that's
you smoking?
That's
Good stuff.
a 3. That's a 3. I thought it was an 8. I have 8 on my paper.
Okay, so I'm gonna do it with the
Like a
30.
school sober.
Okay, so 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12.
So X to the 12th, do y'all agree with that?
Yes.
Perfect. Me, I wouldn't even be able to tell if that was a 3 or 8 at all back there.
Hey, give me some.
All right,
Give me some.
Kason, what about the Y's?
I had an 8 there, y'all.
It's just
Why?
wide. So, I got 1. So it's just wide.
No, it's
Oh, okay, we got 4.
4.
Yeah.
Goofy.
So X to the 12th times Y to the 4th, are y'all okay with that?
Yes.
I'm a
All right, let's try another one.
Or just stupid one. What the? Why is it so big?
You think I can teach you one?
She said-
Hey, listen, you think I can teach you class?
Probably.
I know.
All right,
I
let's
can
write this down for number 5. Negative 2 times X to the 3rd times Y to the 5th times 3x Y to the 3rd times X squared Y. Now, people are going to get confused with this one because it has coefficients.
Isn't this?
You gotta multiply negative 2 times 3.
Why?
Now we know how to do negative 2 times 3?
No. The calculator does, but not
Okay.
us.
Well, type in your calculator. Negative 2 times 3.
You think I can work the problem out?
It is negative 6.
Negative 6. Okay, so when you have problems like this, it says multiply the coefficients and add the exponents of like bases. So you multiply the coefficients and then you do what we've been doing. So negative 2 times 3, he said, is negative 6. All right, now, Daniel, what would my x be to the power of? And Alex, what about my y?
Oh, hungry.
Do y'all agree with that answer?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Why is the 6 way up there?
All right, because it's an exponent, so it's little.
I give
I need you to put your paper of notes in your folder. You need to write down your answer to that.
Let's go.
And then you need to pass your folders to the front.
Eight or nine.
Not fast.
It's got the pin. Yeah.
Yo, Ethan,
Slow.
2 by 4.
Are you sorry?
2 by 4 later.
2 by 4.
All right, let's do it quickly. Row 2, you can put up your calculators and get your phone.
Is it a drywall?
Who said my name?
No, it's not.
It's really not.
Last row, y'all can put up your calculators and get your phones.
Oh my.
Hey, how about that 2 by 4? Let's not talk about
Third row.
That's a bell.
On God, don't have.
Where are you going?
And second row, now y'all, have y'all hit now first row, put your calculators. If you put everything back, make sure you return your pencil so you don't get counted tardy. And then you're good to go. Y'all have a good day.
This is called in this school. I'm about to die.
Oh,
Do it. You almost
What the heck? I just say after. They are.
Oh, no, wow.
I was like, one. I did. I stepped hard. Where's he? Right here.